Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Lulu. I'm the Director of Customer Success at Xendee, and I'm very happy to be co-hosting this webinar together with Justin from OurEnergy. So this is our agenda for today. We will start with some introductions. After that, I'll tell you a little bit about Xendee. Then I'll pass it over to Justin to tell us about OurEnergy and also cover 3 use cases that he modeled using Xendee. We'll close our time together with some Q&A. So as I mentioned, I'm Lulu Arias. I'm the Director of Customer Success here at Xendee. Before joining Xendee, I used to work as a consultant at the Boston Consulting Group, where I led different projects, but mainly focused on mining and oil and gas. And that's actually one of the main reasons why I decided to join Xendee right after my MBA, because I wanted to transition into green energy and create some positive impact in the world. Ever since 2023, I've been working closely with customers, helping them model their microgrids and EV infrastructure, and also co-hosting spaces like this to allow Justin, as well as other customers, showcase their work. Justin, I let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Lulu, and thanks, Xendee, for having me here. So just a brief introduction on myself. Again, I'm Dustin Jolly, the founder and CEO of OurEnergy. I've been in the renewable energy industry for about 25 years. I'm a licensed civil engineer in multiple states, and prior to founding OurEnergy 9 years ago, I was responsible for the renewable energy business in the Americas for URS and AECOM, where we served a lot of high profile and large infrastructure projects. And before that, I worked in the tribal government and tribal energy space and in research and development in hydrogen fuel cells and other new energy technologies. And thanks again so much, Lulu and Xendee team, for having us today.
Thank you, Justin. So now we'd like to know a little bit more about you. So if you could please vote. Great. I see that we already have some responses coming on. We'll give a couple more seconds and then show the results. Great. I think we can go ahead and share with all of you. We have a nice mix here. So mainly engineers, followed by consultants. Then we have a couple developers and others. I'm curious for that mix of others.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much. I think now you can kind of see them. Great. With that, I'll move right in. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Xendee, we're the software company that helps businesses optimize their microgrids and EV infrastructure. So we have 4 products that accompany you through the whole process, from the discovery phase into the proposal, all the way into the detailed engineering design and the operation of the site. So let's say you have several sites that you're looking to decarbonize and you need to know where to start. Then you can use our discovery tool, which based on the addresses, some load information and technology information for the sites, will automatically and simultaneously do the runs for all of those projects and provide a rank order list by CO2, ROI, and other important variables to allow you to define where to get started. Once you selected your site, you might need to create a proposal. And maybe you don't want to spend as much time or resources for a site that hasn't yet been contracted. In that case, you can use our propose tool, which is all catalog-based and helps you to quickly and accurately create feasibility studies and proposals that you can then share with prospects. Once that's done, you might want to go into some more detail, and maybe you want to do a multi-year analysis or model an outage. Maybe you want to work with more accurate data, so 15-minute interval period. For all that, you can use design, which is actually the tool that Dustin and his team used to model these large facilities. So you'll learn more about it during Dustin's presentation as well. And finally, once the site is operational, you might want to continue working with a tool that's similar to the ones you used in the other phases. And so here, Operate basically uses the same algorithms as the other tools, but incorporates real-time data to ensure that the runtime of the operation is continuously being optimized. So there's a lot more that I could cover here, but I'm curious to know how familiar you are with Xendee. So let's pull up another poll. If you don't mind answering this, it's very helpful for us. Well, I see we have some pros. Some of you who haven't heard it, and I'll share your results in just a minute. Let's give a couple more seconds. Great. Okay, so I'm happy to know that many of you have heard of us, but there's a couple that never used it. Yeah, it'd be great if you did. Okay, no, this is really, really interesting. Thank you so much for answering the questions. Right now, I want to give Dustin the time and space to present his use cases, but if you have any questions or want to know more about Xendee, please feel free to post that in the chat and we'll get back to you right after. So with that, I'll pass it over to Dustin to tell us more about OurEnergy.
Thanks, Lulu. Yeah, before we get into some of these interesting use cases, I just wanted to introduce OurEnergy briefly here a bit more. So OurEnergy is a project development services company. We're headquartered in Santa Cruz, California. We are very active in the United States, across the U.S., particularly in California because of being headquartered here and being located on the West Coast for so long. But we really have an international flair to our company and are working on projects consistently throughout the U.S., in Latin America and the Caribbean, in the Pacific Islands, South Pacific, and also in Sub-Saharan, primarily West Africa. Our specialty is in commercial, industrial, and utility scale development services and mission critical facilities. We've really become known for taking on complex projects for high profile stakeholders and mission critical types of use cases. Those include some of the ones we've listed here, like campuses, data centers, government facilities, healthcare, and many others. So really, there's kind of two key elements to our development services work. One is as an extension of a development team or ownership team, where we provide really end-to-end development services from very early feasibility and diligence all the way through EPCM and even operational asset management. One thing that I wanted to mention as it relates to our background in techno-economic and project modeling is that there's quite a bit of depth of history there. For me personally, it goes all the way back to some of my earliest time in the industry, working with a myriad of different models, both on the market and some proprietary work in the company. Those have included models that many of us are familiar with, like NREL System Advisor Model, PV-SYST, ETB, and many others that have become industry standard. And I just wanted to mention that, when Xendee came on the scene, it really came across my radar, maybe 2018, 2019 timeframe. I've had some really great dialogue with the founders and the company over that time. And more recently, over the last few years, we've finally brought Xendee into our own workflows here and have been really pleased to be able to apply the Xendee tool and capabilities, in our important work. So with that, Lulu, I'll hand it back to you. I wanted to mention, I'm sorry, before I hand it back to Lulu, that while I'm really more of an in-depth expert on some of those prior models that we've employed over the years, we've really leaned into converting our team here at OurEnergy into super users and subject matter experts in Xendee, and they've really leaned into that with the Xendee team over the last few years since we've been employing it. And we do have our Director of Engineering, Eric Bestool, on the line as well, and he'll be here during the Q&A session to help out with that portion as we get into some dialogue. So thanks for that, and back over to you, Lulu. Thank you.
Great. So before Dustin kind of goes into his use cases that he prepared for today, we're curious to learn kind of what projects you are working on. So once again, I invite you to answer the poll. got a nice mix here. Give everyone a couple more seconds, and then I'll go ahead and share the results. I think we can go ahead and share. Great, so I guess mainly industrial manufacturing side, but we got a nice mix, a little bit of everything here. Great, perfect. So now I hand it back to Dustin.
Excellent. Thanks, Lulu. Well, I'll jump back in. And before I jump into this first use case for an interesting and prominent client in the electronics sector, Ericsson, I wanted to mention that, reaching back to the description of our work, much of that is for developers and owners, as I mentioned, but some of that work can be also as an independent engineer or owner's engineer, providing pre-investment or pre-acquisition diligence and things of that nature, and also in line with sort of owner's asset management work. So you're going to see a mashup of a little bit of both of those types of business across these case studies. And launching into this first one, of course, is with the owner itself of this new 5G factory of the future that was stood up in Texas several years ago. This is the flagship facility where all of the Ericsson's 5G equipment is manufactured in the United States. And this was a new factory build. So our team was really embedded with the overall architectural and construction team standing up the new factory from scratch. They had a number of interesting operational criteria, really most of which centered around decarbonization. Ericsson, to their credit, has a very strong decarbonization program and holds that in a high regard. So that was one of the goals. The factory was also LEED Gold certified, and we were involved in the LEED Gold certification, including part of the commissioning and enhanced commissioning. And the project was rolled out in several phases and is ongoing. So some of the work is now operational, while other phases are still pending. The solutions developed so far for the 5G factory include about a 25% baseload offset with on-site renewables as a first step. That also included some significant integration of EV charging equipment. And I'm highlighting in bold a couple of these next bullets here because these are really where the Xendee tool and workflow was emphasized in our work. And so we conducted a very in-depth value of resilience assessment for Ericsson, and also an investment grade analysis for their own capital planning to be able to prioritize and roll out this work. As you can see in some of the results, we delivered some of the early stage work, as I'd mentioned, and there's ongoing work still to further decarbonize, add deeper resilience, and continue this programming. Let's see, I'll move to the next slide here to get into a little bit of depth on that. If you could, thanks, Lulu. So I know this is a dense slide with a lot of information. The intent here is not to go through all the details of this, but really just to illustrate some of the interesting depth of analysis that was conducted in this work so far. So you can see that we really had a multivariable analysis that included the decarbonization goals, the resilience goals, and a layered analysis that addressed the value of resilience approach that we took. And essentially, the value of resilience approach is something that we've been refining with a couple of other industry partners over the years, and really is intended to provide an objective approach to analyzing resilience and the value of resilience of certain functions when sometimes those can be very nuanced and tricky to put a dollar value on to ultimately get a dollars and cents cost benefit analysis. And so in this case, we did a very deep dive with the customer to prioritize all of their loads, bucketize those loads into tiers 1, 2, and 3 levels of criticality, and ran numerous scenarios utilizing Xendee to be able to drill down and ultimately convey the benefit, cost, and other nuances of various resilience options on the table. Because in some cases, some electrical reconfiguration or redesign of some of the original factory electrical work was going to be necessary. There were also some complexities here where there were 2 separate utility feeds to the facility, and optimizing around those parallel switch gears and how to ultimately meet all the functionality. I think I'll leave that there, and we can move on to the next case study. I want to leave plenty of room for Q&A here at the end, so I'm just going to keep going right along. But I do have the team here in the back channel as well, so if there are any questions that pop up as I'm running through a couple of these case studies, please do go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and we'll be happy to try to address those in real time, and we'll also come back around. So the next one that we wanted to present was a mission critical office campus. So in this case, this is the California DMV. This is their headquarters campus in Sacramento. The headquarters campus consists of 5 different buildings and 9 parking lots. We have on the next slide, I'll convey a little bit more of the information, but just to hit the high points here, really the DMV's priorities were to demonstrate on their ability and their initiative to lead in terms of on-site, powering their campus from on-site renewables, and a deep integration of EVSE infrastructure around the campus. They already had a modest EVSE system for charging a few fleet vehicles. This work, in addition to the significant amount of renewables that was added, also added about 150 EV chargers to the campus. And this is just to the headquarters campus. As many of you may know, the DMV is rolling out EVSE statewide at all of their branch locations, which number in the hundreds. Getting down to the solution set, really this was an early stage piece of work for strategic planning and development. So again, the options analysis portion of this was really integral, and a value proposition that Xendee brought to the table in terms of being able to run multiple scenarios relatively rapidly, and also do some post-processing to achieve some of the other goals that they were trying to implement. There was also some very interesting work with SMUD. As many of you know, SMUD is a municipal electric utility up in the Sacramento area, and they're well known for really leaning into advanced energy solutions. And I wanted to just take the opportunity to compliment the SMUD team here, as they were really collaborative in that process, along with the folks at the DMV, all the way up to the top leadership. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the results of the work at the DMV, at least in this initial phase, was an in-depth analysis that has been run all the way up to the leadership at DMV to meet their goals, and has been integrated now into their capital programming. And as far as the campus is concerned, we delivered not only an in-depth analysis and report, but full plan specs and estimates to get ready to implement the program. So that said, moving on to the next slide, Lulu, if you wouldn't mind, please. Just again, a couple of snapshots here, a bit of a sneak peek on one of our layout drawings there at the top that just gives you a sense of scale of the work. So this ultimately results in about 3 megawatts of new power generation, battery energy storage, reconfiguration of the campus electrical in order to really lay out the opportunity for nested resilience and microgrid functionality across the buildings independently and in the campus as a whole. And lastly, of course, the iterative process, as I mentioned with Xendee, to run through, be able to post-process, digest with the customer, come back to the table, rerun some scenarios that incorporate some of their feedback and nuance, and then come again, really delivered a lot of value, because that can be incredibly time consuming. And of course, developers and owners alike, are very conscious of the upfront project cost, of course, leading to implementation. And I think at the end of the day, the value proposition, one of the key value propositions that we've achieved from Xendee is being able to continue to convey important information to our customers rapidly in the early stages of project development. Thanks, Lulu. I think we can move on to the third one here. Okay, so the last example that we wanted to present is a master planned community that includes a significant technology industrial park and data center cluster. This program is extensive. It includes some, new community development as well, but the focus of our work really was on the large-scale renewables co-located with the tech industrial park. As you can see on the second bullet there, it included up to potentially 2 gigawatts of renewables, because this customer in particular had a vast amount of land at their disposal that is slated for renewables development in conjunction with the built environment. And it's also near some existing utility scale generation and other resources where there's some collaboration happening to be able to bring load service to this significant new development and load. So getting into the solution set, our role on this program was really as the electric infrastructure program manager. So it spanned activities including transmission and interconnection strategy and analysis, of course, interfacing and dealing with all the stakeholders here in California to bring load service to this substantial new development. A deployment options assessment, of course, which we can get into a bit more depth here in the next slide. And then engagement with the development community, stakeholders, and others through transactional support, and ultimately helping this customer lay out a series of priorities in order to sequence the program. Thanks. We can move on. Okay, so just another snapshot here, and I might want to save a little bit of this for when Eric comes in the Q&A, because I know he was deeply embedded in this work. But really what I wanted to convey on this briefly here for the group was in the blue table there, the development options analysis, as it were. We ran many scenarios that included PPA-based deals, self-generation deals, combinations of those, combinations of different on-site technologies, and even production of derivatives such as hydrogen and fuel cells, and a myriad of other nuanced iterations in between the lines of each one of these, ultimately resulting in a pathway layout for the owner to consider how to approach the stakeholders on and the development community on power purchase and acquisition type of arrangements, and also, of course, their own development investments directly. So really, to put a cap on that, I know I've run through these very quickly, but the value that Xendee has really delivered to us is, I think, time to results at the early stage for important clients that really need visibility on what the outcomes of different project options might be before they deploy too much capital in any given direction, or perhaps also a bit of seeing around corners, as I like to put it, in terms of laying the path towards success. So with that, I think I've gotten through the majority of these case studies, maybe even a little quicker than I'd hoped. So I think we're doing okay on time. And thanks, Lulu. Yeah, we can go to this last slide here, where really the punchline, if you could move back one. Yeah, thanks, Lulu. I wanted to cover a few points on just what this has meant for OurEnergy as we've gone through our evolution of integrating Xendee over the last few years. I don't want to repeat myself, so of course, I've talked about some of the value and rapid analysis that Xendee has delivered, but our previous workflow included, I think, a little, we're constantly refining our ability to integrate our toolkit, both with external providers like Xendee and with our internal proprietary modeling and pre and post processing. And so while we had to previously have more modules that we had to lace together to ultimately deliver end-to-end services, Xendee has enabled us to combine and eliminate some duplicative subscriptions, for our own overhead and workflows, and ultimately some more streamlining of that process. We've, as I mentioned, we've been able to eliminate a couple of different other software subscriptions while we've consolidated with Xendee. And I think this last set of bullets on the value and synergies is really important, and what I wanted to primarily touch on this slide before we go into the Q&A. And it's I think the interesting thing about Xendee and our symbiotic relationship is that while Xendee has delivered values in the ways that I've described to our own workflows, I'd like to think that we've also delivered value to Xendee synergistically, because as we take on these pretty complex projects, it's been illuminating in terms of determining what the boundary conditions and limitations of the software are, and then being able to work with that and move forward as a collaboration. There have been some cases where, for example, Xendee has illuminated some prior analysis that we had done and enabled us to refine that. And conversely, there have been some situations where we've run into some head scratchers as we're going through our analysis on the platform, and it's led to some identification of bugs and fixing of bugs, which hopefully benefits all of us. I'm sure it does, and also has illuminated where some additional functionality can be added or strengthened on the platform to facilitate certain types of analysis. So from my personal point of view, I just wanted to thank the Xendee team for that collaboration. It really has been a pleasure, and I think we can leave it there and start to get into some of the group discussion, Lulu, if that works for you.
Yeah, great. And we've been kind of like answering some questions, but there's a specific one that I think you, Dustin, or Eric, or Kurt from OurEnergy could answer regarding the Ericsson example.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, Christopher is interested in understanding the value of resilience evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
He specifically wants to know about the metrics that you evaluated for resilience in that example.
Sure. I'll take the first stab at that. If Eric would like to jump in, you're more than welcome. So on the maybe one more slide forward, Lulu. Thank you. So I'll draw the attention to the top right table there with the red, orange, and yellow boxes. Not to dive into the details, but really what's at the heart of a value of resilience analysis is, number one, being able to characterize the loads as absolutely critical. And it doesn't have to be in 3 tiers, of course. The sort of standard format that we have arrived at through various iterations of this process, we typically bucketize them into 3 different load tiers. You could add as many as you'd like. Of course, adding more adds more complexity to the analysis. But really, what's at the heart of the exercise is working closely with the client to understand the criticality of the loads and to characterize those into their different buckets. And then importantly, understanding what the value of each one of those is. Their value can be conveyed in some nuanced ways, which is why this VOR analysis is very useful. For example, what is the value of business continuity to this particular customer? How much money do they lose by the minute or by the hour by not being operational? What's the value of decarbonizing, both in terms of dollars and cents, but also in terms of customer relationships and things like that, shareholder value. These things can be very, very nuanced. And so really what the trick is at the front end, I would advise, is working very closely with the customer to present a structure and provide some clarity around just how they see and how they measure these values and come to consensus on that at an early stage. And with that consensus and with those metrics set, then we can dive into the analysis and understand how to sequence the load cascading in an extended outage, for example, such that critical loads are maintained as they must be. Discretionary loads are handled appropriately over the certain time frame and resources available, etc. So I'll pause there and see if that helped with that question, or if there's more there, I'd be happy to continue.
Christopher, do you have any follow-up questions? If not, we can move on.
Thanks for the good question, Christopher. I anticipated that the VOR analysis would draw some questions, so I appreciate that.
That's great. And then we have another question from Krish. The question is, I see that the NPV for the Sacramento DMV is negative. How did this project get approval?
Yeah, excellent question. This is a snapshot of one element of the analysis, and a net present value in the case of the DMV wasn't necessarily their top priority. Their top priority is demonstrating meeting their carbon reduction goals and various other internal objectives and mandates as an agency, as a department of the state. So this was a topic of discussion, of course, and is ongoing in terms of how and in what sequencing and right sizing the systems such that that certain financial metrics can be met or at least optimized. The NPV analysis also included, there were several different iterations of this. So I don't want us to get hung up on the results showing in particular. This is really an example, but there were several different iterations that bifurcated the investment in all of the EV charging, for example, whether or not to include that in the net present value, because the DMV's goals in this case was to really invest considerably in EVSE infrastructure, starting at their campus and then fanning out into all of their other branch offices as a leader in the state. And so how to consider the return on investment of those is not exactly the same as a private charge point operator or charging as a service type of customer might convey, right? Or a private customer or private developer that is trying to get a direct positive return from the project. So really it was more about meeting their resilience goals, decarbonizing and implementing the EVSE solutions, which was a downward pressure on the financial results, depending on how we end up slicing and dicing the financing and providing treatment for that in the returns for that particular case. Hopefully that's helpful.
Great. Thank you, Dustin. And I have one other question that asks, how do you execute alternative project development and investment, PPA and similar? Is that a service line that you self-perform or bring on a development partner?
I'm not sure I caught the first part of that. Would you mind repeating just the first part of that question, Lulu?
How do you execute alternative project development and investment, PPA and similar?
Well, is this in particular to a specific case, or is this just in general?
They didn't say, but maybe you can kind of like post me in the chat again.
Sure. Well, I'll address it. I'll address it as more of an in general, in generalities. So how we address these things, in a front end pre-development analysis or a feed study, if you will, which is most often where we're employing Xendee, at the front end of a project, right sizing and really working toward a well-defined project. Running alongside right sizing the project, of course, is a financial options analysis that often includes direct investment, cash purchase, purchase with some combination of cash and debt, PPA, energy as a service, or others, right? But those being the common pathways to project delivery. So in addition to the technical options analysis, we will also run a financial options analysis and present those to the client, and ultimately let that conversation and those results drive the next steps of how the project is structured and delivered. Hopefully that answers the question. If there's something more specific, I'm sure we can get into that in the deeper Q&A as well.
Those are the questions that I have now for now. I don't know if there's anyone else that has any other questions regarding any specific use cases that Dustin has showcased today.
Great questions. Maybe in the absence of a another specific question, Eric, our engineering director, is here, and he was deeply involved in that last data center case study that I mentioned. I wanted to invite you, Eric, if you had anything to add to how I described that work. I know Eric was leading the charge on that effort, and so I don't want to undersell the what went into that. Eric, did you have anything to add?
Sure, yeah, I can add something to that. I guess I'll just call the attention to two things specifically. One, the help section in Xendee is actually pretty awesome. I think if anybody already has a license or is looking to get a license, is kind of on the edge. The help section is actually like a very great way to learn about the different ways that things interact.
Thanks, Eric.
And the other one on the large infrastructure project, I think the other thing I'll call attention to is that there's some creative ways that you can put components together in Xendee. For example, you can take the electricity as an offtake from a solar system or from wind and say, okay, I want to put this into an electrolyzer that's going to generate hydrogen. And then you want to take that hydrogen and have it generate electricity with a fuel cell that potentially powers a data center or something.
Right. So building, I'm gonna riff on this a little bit with you, Eric. You're sparking a few thoughts for me. So I laid out a couple of examples where we could have self-generation, we could have external utility generation through a VPPA type of arrangement, or others. And really something that we were facing on this program, as I recall, Eric, was essentially an imbalance of potential generation versus the load, right? And so what to do with that additional generation, I think ultimately became the question. Could we generate hydrogen on site, store that, produce derivatives, use it as simply a hydrogen battery, converting it back again. Of course, there's conversion losses and a whole dialogue we can get into on a hydrogen battery versus a traditional electrochemical, lithium ion battery or otherwise. And I know, that's down, in between the lines of a lot of, what was being considered here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thanks, Justin. And yeah, you can take the hydrogen, you can directly go to market with it, send it into a pipeline, have an offtake with a truck, or have it power a fuel cell and send it right back to powering an on-site load. And as far as I know, I don't know of any other softwares on the market that have that level of flexibility that you can go in there and say, like, I want to have the electricity to be offtake and to basically convert it into hydrogen, get into back from another energy sources. Pretty innovative solution.
Thanks,
Great.
Eric.
And well, Jason asks if you can discuss the data center project in a little bit more detail. And we also have some other questions coming up, but let's start with that.
Sure. Well, that's where we are here. We're still talking about the data center project. So, what sort of detail are we looking for? As I described, it's really a planned technology industrial park. I guess, Eric, what I'll interject is that at the stage of analysis and development that we and our client are currently at, we characterized a data center. Really, it could be a cluster of data centers with varying load shapes, and some other use cases in this technology industrial park, ultimately, which is what the component of the development was attempting to illustrate. And so we, in addition to modeling the load, simulating the load of a data center and an industrial park, and utilizing that as a baseline for the analysis with all these different options that Eric touched on, we also integrated grid generation, diurnal grid generation from nearby wind farms, the co-located solar farms, and others, and really did a pretty complex set of different scenario analyses that included different generation mixes, different storage mixes, different curtailment anti-curtailment treatment, as Eric touched on with the hydrogen production as being one of those, and various others. So now this is an early stage development. It's in the planning phase, and this work is really at this stage used to chart the pathway toward development and sequencing.
And I think just to add on top of that, I saw another question in the chat about financial models. Yeah, so Xendee does a techno-economic analysis. And one of the things with this data center is that we're able to model all of these different energy sources, get the production profile of the solar, of the wind, and then also get the financial model of that. What's the CapEx, what's the OpEx, the net present value, and basically a whole cash flow model that normally you would have to build out in another location.
Great.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. So,
I'm just pulling the Q&A up here as well, Lulu. I might be behind you.
maybe the ones related to. I guess we can go with this one regarding post performance. So, the question is, among the projects you have completed, what feedback have you received from customers after using the system?
Well, as far as feedback from customers, overall, I would like to just convey that, we're very proud that typically our customer feedback is generally positive with our work, and we take a lot of pride in being able to provide this kind of service, and we think that Xendee adds a lot of value in that regard. So in terms of customer feedback, it's less so specific to Xendee. Xendee is kind of a tool under the hood here at OurEnergy as far as most of our customers are concerned. And what the customer gets back is our insights after running Xendee along with our other workflows, pre and post processing, and conveying the insights and results that we derive and sort of summarize in our judgment for those customers, right? So I would say that the feedback that we get is more so in our work and delivery to our clients and less so about Xendee specifically. But Eric, I know that there is some cases where we do things like over the shoulder type of analysis with some of our clients, where they can kind of see what some of the assumptions and various things like that are going in, and what some of the nuances of the results that we're getting are. I don't know if that sparks anything for you, Eric, that you might like to add in that regard.
Nothing in particular, honestly.
Okay. In terms of feedback, I think the core question was about feedback.
Yeah, I mean, generally the feedback that we've gotten from clients and that we even get internally is just the speed at which we can put together a feasibility study for something with just a wide variety of assets and get the financial component of that as well. You can get a very detailed financial model out of it, and then you can export it. It's very easy to export just the 8760s and the cash flow model, and then do post-processing on that if that's necessary. If a client wants to really dive into the hourly interval data, you can do that as well.
Thanks, Eric.
Great. I guess next question from Zach. Have you modeled generation in islanded mode, so with no grid connection, that meets data centers' reliability requirements?
Short answer is yes. Please, Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, short answer, yes. So that's one of the things that we look at. Well, for the data center specifically, look at some options with the grid connected, some options with primary mode of operation with the power coming from the grid, then some options with grid connection, but just for standby power. So primary power from PV, BESS, wind, and then an islanded option as well. And then for the reliability of that, it's a great point, right? They have reliability standards, and they don't want to have their data center going down. So typically go for like the 5 nines reliability, like 99.999% reliability. Mm-hmm. And we would put some sort of backup generator on site and include that in the model as well. That could be like a diesel generator, or natural gas generator, or even a fuel cell. But yeah, we would need to include some sort of extra reliability for that. Right. Which would be standard in data center modeling.
Right. Excellent, Eric. Thanks. I wanted to add to that before we move on to another question, that this is increasingly common for us. We also do a lot of projects, I had mentioned, in international venues, on islands for island communities. That's not to confuse an island with running a project islanded, but running an entire island, could act like a microgrid as well. And some small resort microgrids or others, we do certainly model them in that way. But really, the nuance I wanted to convey on this question is, related to modeling an islanded facility is this is increasingly common for us, especially with large load customers, because of the grid and interconnection and load service constraints that we're all well aware of. And so, time to power, as we like to refer to it, is a prominent issue. Being able to get load service to a proposed development is a universal struggle, I think, these days. And running analyses and even taking project implementation approaches, which we have done and have operational projects where we actually islanded the project first while waiting for a grid interconnection, and then interconnected the project later, in some cases a year or more later, once the grid connectivity was available, and planning for that in advance, and then rolling out the implementation in an islanded before interconnect type of process is something that we have increasingly been implementing and also seeing as sort of a necessary course of action to meet some of our customers' goals.
Great. So Christopher is asking where you get the input for the cost, for instance, the costing capex for the battery, solar PV, sourcing local cost estimates.
Yeah, I can take that.
Sure.
Yeah, on the industry level, on a high level industry perspective, we would use NREL ATB or Woods Mackenzie, kind of their market insights, and then we would correct that for any regional variations. Basically, like look at Department of Labor and see, okay, we're working in a rural part of Oregon, so what would be the correction for labor in an area? But then when we're working in a specific zone, like if we're working in Nevada, we'll look at similar projects that we have in the area and just try and get quotes, reach out to partners in the area, and try and get information from that source as well. So kind of like if all you have is the access to the national stuff, I think that's great. Just use the national stuff and then correct based on local variances, and that'll get 80% of the way.
That's great. Thanks, Eric. And beyond that, of course, we've just been through the process of so many projects that we have our own database of costs by region and prior experience. We also have a vast network of connections in the contracting space and labor space, and in the technology provider space, where we can source current numbers to support our analysis.
Great. We got a couple more questions regarding both of our services, which we'll follow up after the webinar. So that's good. Yeah, those questions kind of continue to pop up. If there's anything else regarding the use cases, we'll give you a couple more minutes to kind of ask that. Let's leverage Justin and Eric here. I think you've done a great job, Justin, going over the use cases and kind of like addressing all of those questions. As I mentioned, I will follow up with many of you who I have been interacting through the chat. But unless there's anything else, I think we're good for today. Thank you all so much for joining. We'll be sharing a link to the recording so that you can review this presentation later this week. Having said that, thank you all so much for joining today, and thank you, Justin, for co-hosting this with me.
Thank you, and thank you all. Appreciate it.